Oh, yeah, it's hour number 2 of Budweiser's Weekday Sports Beat with IrishBreakdown.com, and that can mean only one thing, Jesse. Are you ready for some rapid fire?
Rapido, 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 fire.
Here we go. Here we go. All right, I'm going to start with a comment from Michael in the YouTube chat. He says, calling it now, the Irish come in at number 8 in the rankings tonight. Ole Miss drops to number 9. I will say that I was at least more open to the idea this could happen before the announcement today that Charlie Weiss Jr. is going to remain offensive coordinator at Ole Miss through the college football playoff run. We talked about that at the start of the show. So, what do you think? Is Notre Dame going to stay at number 9? Do you see them moving up at all? Do you see Ole Miss falling? What do you think about all this with the selection show as we speak right now, less than an hour away, if it starts on time tonight, which it did not last week? But there's no basketball game tonight before.
This is a loaded question. I think there's two big questions that happen in this ranking. What happens with A&M? How far did they fall? I think the biggest question is, do they stay in front of Oregon or fall behind Oregon? And then what happens to Ole Miss? Do they remain the same? Do they get penalized? I'm going to shake it up here a little bit. I think Texas A&M is going to be like 6. I think that Oregon will be 7. Or sorry, A&M will be 5. Oregon will be 6. Oklahoma will be 7. Bama will be 8. No, will be 9. Ole Miss will be behind them.
You think Bama's going to leapfrog everybody?
I think that the committee has backed themselves into a tough corner with Alabama because say Alabama loses the SEC championship and BYU wins, I think Bama would have to fall out. BYU would take their spot at 10, and then you'd have the 2 auto bids between the group of 5 and potentially the ACC or another group of 5, because the committee tries to say that, you know, the championship games can't hurt you, but if BYU wins and Alabama loses, BYU has to take someone's spot. And so I think that they have to put them in front of Notre Dame, because if Alabama loses, they can still stay in and BYU can get in as well. That's the conundrum I think the committee has put themselves in.
Man, you've got me confused with all these places that you're moving. I think A&M only falls to number 5. I don't think they fall that far. And so you're saying Texas Tech moves ahead of basically Georgia and Texas Tech move ahead. Actually, that would be 4 and 5 or 6. In either case, I don't think Alabama's moving past Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame has an excellent chance to move up 1 spot. And based on everything we've seen from this committee, they obviously value Notre Dame. And I think that having them at number 8 sets up for more insurance for ensuring that Notre Dame is going to get one of these at-large bids next week, if there is any, tumult with what happens in those 2 conference championship games in the SEC, with Alabama potentially winning, and in the Big 12 with BYU potentially winning a rematch with Texas Tech. D-Rock Irish says an Oklahoma podcast last night said he thinks the Sooners stay put at number 8. Did say the Sooners struggling offensively and Notre Dame could jump them. And that's what I'm looking at. Like watching this Oklahoma team.
They make that rational decision.
Right. Like this is, I think, Notre Dame's best chance is to just move past Oklahoma 1 spot, because of the fact that, like, if you look at Notre Dame, they are still in all 3 phases, offense, defense, special teams. They pop more than anybody. Like we talked in the first hour about the fact that Notre Dame has 7 special teams touchdowns this season. And you look at where they are, like in terms of being top 15 in both scoring offense and scoring defense. Oklahoma can't make that claim. And, like you look at some of the other metrics, Oklahoma's good in some metrics, but that offense really struggles. And that's where I could see maybe Notre Dame makes that move ahead. I don't think that Ole Miss is going to drop 2 spots. I could see them falling 1 spot, but I don't know that they fall 2 spots after losing Lane Kiffin, especially, since they are keeping Charlie Weiss intact. as the coordinator. But it is still a question as to whether or not, like Golding, the defensive coordinator, getting promoted, like what kind of impact that could have, because you're talking about an inexperienced head coach now being the head coach and leading a team into the college football playoffs. Sean says the committee is going to set it up Notre Dame versus Miami. I wouldn't mind seeing that at all. We talked about this last week. I would love to see a rematch in the first round of the playoffs between these two, with all the smoke and steam and everything else coming off. I would love to see it. I know Miami fans think that Notre Dame would be afraid of that. I think that Notre Dame would love to have that chance at a rematch against the Hurricanes in the playoffs.
So my biggest you touched on this a little bit. I'm trying not to be a homer about this, but I think that there is a serious case for Notre Dame to jump Oklahoma based off of Oklahoma played a 5-6 Auburn team that's fired their coach and bad. Notre Dame played a pretty equivalent 4-7 Stanford team who just hired their new head coach and had an interim head coach. Both games on the road. Oklahoma's playing LSU. I got Alabama and Auburn mixed up. But anyways, Oklahoma looked bad against a not great LSU team. Notre Dame took care of business. Their offense really struggled. And at this point in the season, if we're going, kind of off this eyeball test, I think it would make sense that Notre Dame could potentially jump Oklahoma, and that would be huge because that means Notre Dame would host that game.
Right, exactly.
And no longer have to be on the road.
It's the 8th spot you're hosting. I do think it's interesting. This just crossed my mind, the fact that, like we talked about, how, like if you lose to a team that fired its head coach during the season, kind of hard to have any sympathy for you. Notre Dame only played one team this year that fired its coach during the season, and that, of course, was Sam Pittman at Arkansas. And that is still such a unique one. And I know everyone likes to rip Notre Dame for, oh, it's all great. You played the worst team in the SEC and you smoked them. Well, look at the results that Arkansas had. Even though they fired their coach, they continued to play very well with Petrino as head coach offensively. And they played all those games where they lost their SEC games. This was going into last week by a combined, I think it was 40 points. Notre Dame beat them by 43. They were still a really good offense. And Notre Dame's defense, at a time that the defense was still struggling, held Arkansas to 13 points. That's the least points that Arkansas has scored in a game all season. So, yeah, they're bad because they were horrible defensively, but they were still a really good offensive team. And they played with basically everybody in the SEC this season. So, of course, everyone's taking their shots at Notre Dame these days as they jockey for their college football playoff inclusions and rankings. And Steve Sarkisian, the Texas head coach, no different. Here is his quote about Notre Dame after his team's win over Texas A&M over the weekend. Quote, "This whole idea that, well, you lost to Florida. Well, the team that played for the national championship last year lost to Northern Illinois at home. So you're going to punish us, and you don't want to punish them, but they were good enough to play for a national title. So I have no doubt in my mind that the team we have in the locker room downstairs is a playoff football team and worthy of an opportunity to play for a national championship." End quote. That from Steve Sarkisian, Jesse, is blank.
Is a bunch of hot garbage because Notre Dame had one loss to a team the whole season that was Northern Illinois. Texas had 3 losses, and one of them included a really bad Florida team. So comparing one loss with that is in itself a really bad loss compared to 3 losses and one of them is really bad. There's just no comparison. And I feel like that's where I'm just annoyed is there's like better examples out there. Like why is Notre Dame always the comparison or the punching bag or everyone always has something to say about their position not being fair as it relates to Notre Dame. And I'm just so tired of it.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can lose to Ohio State and still get into the playoff if you don't also lose to Florida. You can lose to both Ohio State and Florida if you don't also lose to Georgia. Like you lost 3 games. That's part of it. And the fact that Florida is one of those losses. It's not just that you lost to Florida. It's not just that you lost to Ohio State. So don't cry about playing a great, out of conference opponent. You lost 3 games, and that's where you are. And one of those losses is a bad loss to Florida. And like you said, like comparing that to Notre Dame last year is just ludicrous because that was Notre Dame's only loss in the regular season. And on top of that, Notre Dame had just come off a big road win over Texas A&M to open the season, one of 4 ranked teams that they beat last year. You can't compare one loss by Notre Dame, as bad as it was, to 3 losses that you have, like 2 of them to good teams and 1 of them to a bad team. If you had beaten Florida and your only losses were to Ohio State and Georgia, like, you're making things a heck of a lot more difficult for the college football playoff committee right now, because they would be in serious consideration. And then that would be even tougher on the Miamis and BYUs of the world. So you just can't compare 3 losses to 1 loss by Notre Dame, as bad as it is. You just can't. You don't lose to Florida, you're probably in the playoffs.
Well, you can also couple that with they had to beat a bad Kentucky and Mississippi State team in overtime. Both of those games they had to win in overtime. And so when you look at Texas, you have to legitimately question their consistency of play. Yeah, some weeks, sure, you can beat Texas A&M, but other weeks you're losing to Florida. You're going to overtime with a bad Kentucky team. You're going to overtime with a bad Mississippi State team. What consistency are you proving to the playoff committee that if they let you into the playoff, you're just not going to get steamrolled by one of these better teams because you didn't want to show up and play Texas football that day?
Correct. And I'm looking, Sean in the YouTube chat just asked if any of the SEC teams beat up on Arkansas the way Notre Dame did. The answer is no. And remember, Notre Dame beat Arkansas 56-13. That was one of 2 teams, Texas being the other, that put up 50-plus points. Those are the only 2 teams that put up 50-plus against Arkansas, Notre Dame and Texas. But Texas also gave up 37 points to Arkansas compared to 13 by Notre Dame. Texas won by 15 points. That was, in conference play, that was the most lopsided loss that Arkansas had, was 52-37 to Texas. They lost by 2 touchdowns to Missouri, 31-17 to close the season. So the answer is no. Nobody in the SEC beat up on Arkansas like Notre Dame beat up on Arkansas this year. So, again, it's like talking about how great all these SEC teams are, and there's some good teams in the SEC, but Notre Dame beat Arkansas more handily than any team in the SEC. They actually played very close with SEC competition, including some good teams this year. Fill in the blank. It's blank that the ACC Network is scheduled to re-air the Notre Dame-Miami game 4 times this Thursday and another 4 times this Friday.
It's a huge waste of television time. No, seriously, because the committee rankings come out tonight. And there's nothing that Notre Dame or Miami can do between now and the final rankings that would jockey Miami ahead of Notre Dame. It's so ridiculous. They're wasting their own time, hoping to potentially change the minds. I don't know, prove this point of, if we air it on TV, more people will believe us or something. I'm so fed up with the ACC and how they've positioned themselves in this whole matter, just kind of completely disregarding Notre Dame. Like Notre Dame has done nothing for the ACC. So again, huge waste of time. The rankings come out tonight. That airs Thursday and Friday. And it's not like you would hope that they would have aired it before the rankings, because then it's like, maybe they're trying to, like when it's voting season, people just throw out all these random ads. Like, if we throw this out there enough, people will watch it and latch on and think Miami is better. But it's just, it has nothing to do with the rankings that are about to come out tonight.
Yeah, I think it is completely petulant. But, at least the ACC is putting its highest profile entity on its own TV network. Might as well have Notre Dame on there as much as possible. And good for Notre Dame as well, and the 12 people who will be watching the ACC network to see CJ Carr lead a pair of double-digit comebacks in the second half on the road in his first career start. think about that. Even though Notre Dame ultimately lost the game on a field goal with less than a minute to play, C.J. Carr in his first career start led Notre Dame back from double-digit deficits twice in the second half. So that'll be on there as well, unless they edit it so much that they're not even going to include that stuff in there. But it is amazing considering that the ACC network wouldn't even exist if not for Notre Dame's partial affiliation with the ACC, and not to mention, the whole ESPN contract. I don't think they wouldn't be getting as much. The value of that ESPN ACC contract wouldn't be as much if Notre Dame was not included. So no, Notre Dame might not be a full-time member of your conference, but they're still propping you up. And to try to do this and throw it in their face, and as Salty says, are they trying to drive Notre Dame out of ACC football? I mean, this is a really interesting position that the ACC is taking on this thing. And I realize they want to support their own team, but they're also disregarding what we've talked about from the very beginning. Like, it's not just a head-to-head. It is also who your losses are to. And they have 2 losses to 4-loss unranked teams that didn't even make the conference championship game in their own conference that Miami plays in. How can that be forgiven? How can that be overlooked by the College Football Playoff Committee? It can't, and it hasn't been. And they are watching the way these 2 teams are playing on the field right now. Like, Miami is playing now closer to what Notre Dame has been playing for the majority of the season, with the exception of those.
Because it lit a fire under them.
Yeah, because they found themselves backed into a corner because they lost to 2 teams they shouldn't have lost to.
Too late in the season.
Yeah, that's what happens when you lose games in October. Sorry. Let me just ask you this one, following up on some of this Miami conversation. Scale of 1 to 10. You're going to give me 2 different numbers here. First, how would you rank what you thought about the Notre Dame-Miami rivalry going into the season versus how would you rank it right now? Like the intensity, 10 being the most intense, 1 being not much at all.
I think at the beginning of the season, I would have put it at a 5 out of 10. I think there was definitely some history there, but it was more so kind of in the past, nothing of the current or stuff that I've really been around to witness. So I was kind of on the fence, like, oh yeah, this is a rival, but it feels like one of those old rivals, a rival that's kind of lingered around. But now, I think I would put it at a solid 7. It's definitely climbed a little bit just because of how much hate that Miami fans have thrown on the gasoline or onto the fire here. And I think Notre Dame on the other side of it just wants to kind of strap up and play again and really take it to Miami. So I think that there would be a lot of, because of all the stuff that Miami has done in the last month or so, I think that it would turn nasty because Notre Dame fans would want to be in your face if I told you so, prove it type stuff. And of course, Miami, if they came out on top, would be like, listen, this is what we were telling you the whole time. So that's where I'm at. I don't think it's this crazy, intense, burning thing quite yet. I think we're on our way there, especially if they play again.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially like the stuff coming from the other side, I would probably put it a little bit higher than you right now. I'd put it at least an 8, 8.5. I think like it has ratcheted up quite a bit coming into the season. I honestly would have put it at a 2 or a 3, and it's because of the stuff we talked about coming into the season. Even though there's history there, like the height of it was still late 80s and early 90s, and then it got so bitter that they just ended it, and they've barely played for the better part of the last 35 or so years. And then this happens, and it has become the most contentious single game, maybe other than, the 1988 game at Notre Dame Stadium, where all the Miami fans, so many of them are still peeved about Catholics versus convicts. And then, calls that they shot the Cleveland Gary play and all that stuff at the goal line and everything else. Like, this has become the most contentious thing, this back and forth, most of it coming from Miami fans. There's a lot of venom there. So I'd put it pretty high now. And I still say it was just not that much coming into the season. But hey, at the very least, unless the ACC helps Miami pull out of another game against Notre Dame, we've got Miami coming to Notre Dame Stadium next year. So we've got that to look forward to in what has become a renewed rivalry. Okay, I'm going to skip forward to make sure that we get to the Lane Kiffin stuff before we get to anything else, because there is a lot of meat on the bone with Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. And again, Lane announced today, and Ole Miss verified it, that Charlie Weiss Jr. is going to remain the Ole Miss offensive coordinator throughout Ole Miss's playoff run. And with the rankings coming out tonight, we'll see what impact that has. But Lane Kiffin had his introductory press conference at LSU yesterday, and here are a couple things that he talked about in said press conference.
The last 48 hours, in a lot of ways, sucked. It's the only way I can describe it. It sucked for a lot of people. And there was no way to possibly do it, in my opinion, any better than we did from a timing standpoint, because it's a bad scheduling system of how it's set up. And eventually, hopefully, it gets like the NFL, where you can't do that in the season and don't have to make those decisions. I'm never going to make a decision on money. And I'm telling you right now, I don't know what my contract is here. That's not very financially responsible, okay? I'm sure it's really good, okay? I don't know what it is, nor did I know at the other places what the numbers were. Because I said in the beginning, I told Jimmy Sexton, don't tell me the numbers, okay? I want to make a decision that has nothing to do with money for me. Now, tell me the numbers and the plan for what the money is for the players. Because that's everything in that area to me.
Okay, so comments on a couple of different things there. And Jimmy Sexton, just to explain for anybody who doesn't know, Jimmy Sexton is from the agency CAA, and he is Lane Kiffin's agent. He represents a lot of different coaches and media personalities, including Nick Saban, as one of the examples. My first question, Jesse, do you buy or sell that Lane Kiffin does not know the financials of his new contract at LSU?
I sell that he doesn't know the overall amount. I buy that he probably doesn't know the intricate details and the incentives and kickbacks and this and that. And I also buy that he didn't take the job for the money. I think that his little speech he did there was maybe a little bit, drawn out and not probably 100% true. But I do believe at the end of the day, he didn't take it solely because he was getting paid more money. I think he can recruit better, and I think he thinks it's a better place to coach football.
I mean, it's eerily similar to the same things Brian Kelly was saying. Now, maybe we'll find out here within 3 years who the better coach is between Lane Kiffin and Brian Kelly. When we see what Kiffin does down there at LSU, but so many of the things have just, been the same as Brian Kelly. He thought he was going to go there and it was going to be easier to recruit and compete for national championships and the whole thing. I completely sell the fact that Lane Kiffin has no clue what his contract is. Now, he might not have focused on that as his main reason. I do agree with what he's saying, and you and I were talking about this over the weekend. The money that'll be invested into the players, I think that
his roster.
I think that, like, when you compare Ole Miss to LSU, there is going to be a bigger investment on the LSU side coming from that. Now, that's obviously one of the reasons that Brian Kelly had to be shown the door, because there was a bigger investment there and he wasn't able to do anything with it. So, I'll buy that, but I don't buy that Lane Kiffin has no clue what his freaking contract is. Again, it might not have been the focus, but he knows he's going to get paid a pretty nice check every week or every month when it comes through.
Oh yeah, he's definitely getting some good money. And I think you brought up something interesting there about Brian Kelly. I don't think he necessarily got fired because of his ultimate record. Like, they were 7-4, potentially could have, went 8-4 or maybe even 9-3 to end the season with Brian Kelly. I think he got let go because he simply didn't invest into coaching in the program for how much money was like you just said, going into the roster and to the head coach position. And so I don't think that that's going to be Lane Kiffin. I think Lane Kiffin is someone who's fully going to invest, into the what the role is, and there's not going to be so many rumors that he's just golfing every other day.
I'm going to save that here for just a second. So what about the other part? Is the messaging that has been driven home that you heard Lane Kiffin talk about there? It's the calendar. It's the calendar's fault. Nick Saban was saying it on game day over the weekend. All these other talking heads, Dan Orlovsky. It's very curious to me that on the whole college game day set, the only guy who sits at that desk that is not represented by the same agency Lane Kiffin is represented by is Pat McAfee. Everyone else is a CAA client. Dan Orlovsky, who has also been delivering the same messaging on ESPN over the last couple of days, is a CAA client. Pat McAfee is the only one not a CAA client because he doesn't have an agent. He's one of the few guys who represents himself. All these other guys, Reese Davis included, Desmond Howard, Kirk Herbstreit, Nick Saban, on down to Dan Orlovsky, also on ESPN, and a lot of others, they're all represented by the same agency that Lane Kiffin is represented by. And they're all delivering the same message about it's the calendar's fault. It's not Lane Kiffin's fault. There's nothing he can do about it. You got to change the calendar. You got to change the college football calendar. What do you think about that argument?
I mean, I think there's a good amount of validity to it at the end of the day, because when is Lane Kiffin supposed to make this decision? When the season's over and it's too late? Like, you can't be asked to leave.
But the calendar is what the calendar is. No one's making him make this move. I mean, there's no guarantee that he's going to go to LSU and even be in the playoffs again. You're coaching a team that's going to be in the playoffs, and you decide to pull up.
Yeah, but it's a lose no matter what you do. If you stay, you lose out on a potential career-changing opportunity at a program like LSU. And if you leave, everyone hates you because you left, because you have a team that's in the playoff that can win a national championship, but you're going on to a historically better program that is going to give you more resources to help you be a better coach. Like, if you have to
already in the playoffs with Ole Miss, and now you're going to miss out on a chance.
Yeah, but he's thinking down the road. Ole Miss isn't going to be this good for this long,
But they are right now. They're in the playoffs now for the first time ever.
I just think it's hard to ask someone to make this big of a career decision on the date that he was asked to do it.
How are you going to change the calendar, though? You have a semester system in college athletics. You have the holidays in college.
Start these games earlier.
That's literally the only way to do it. The only way to change the calendar is to start the season in early August instead of September. That's the only way to change it. Is you've got it literally. You're going to have to start the football season a month earlier. That's the only way to do it.
I think you could lop off conference championships, and you could also push the regular season up as well. I think there's things that can be done, but yeah, I mean, because of what you said, the semester system and when transfers have to be enrolled and be official students so they can participate in the next season, that's definitely there. And so how are you going to – and the thing is if you expand the playoff, this only gets worse.
Exactly. You expand the playoff, then you've got to have another week, to play more games that have to be added in. So again, the only way to change the calendar is to start the season a month earlier. That's the only way it's going to be done. And, whether or not that you could get the presidents of the universities to go for that, that's a pretty big question, because you would obviously be starting seasons before school even begins, so like your student sections and bands and everything else, they're not even on campus yet by the time you would have to start the season. So I don't know. Literally, I'm just tired of hearing this argument, because nobody held a gun to Lane Kiffin's head and said you have to take the LSU job and literally leave your college football playoff team high and dry in the process. So like he can say what he wants. So the last part of this is Kiffin obviously wanted to coach the Rebels through the playoffs even after taking the job, but Ole Miss athletic director Keith Carter said, "No way. Are you in or out?" telling Kiffin that he can't still coach at Ole Miss after taking the new job. And, like with today's developments as well, that they're letting Charlie Weiss Jr. stay on as offensive coordinator, you can kind of include that in there if you want.
Yeah, I think this is, again, a really tough question because I see both sides. On one side, if you're the athletic director, and maybe LSU is a big part of this, like what if he was leaving to go to a Big Ten school or obviously not someone within the SEC and one of your, direct rivals. I get why you would say no. But then at the same time, I get why you would also say yes, and potentially want to see, your program win a national championship. And so it's really hard. I think, again, there's really no right answer because I think you're going to get criticized on either way. Me personally, I would have said, Lane Kiffin, you've made your decision. You can no longer coach here. But I do think it's suspicious that he's allowing Charlie Weiss Jr. to come back, especially if it benefits them staying in, the college football playoff and still holding on to their at-large bid. I think that's a bit hypocritical to say, oh, but you know what? Actually, we'll send the plane for Charlie Weiss Jr.
We're willing
He
to
can come
take
back.
other guys. Yeah, we're willing to take other guys on the staff who are going to be leaving. I mean, it's obviously different with Lane Kiffin because he is the head coach, and him diverting his attention between the two places. I think that Weiss can stay at Ole Miss and he's obviously not going to have to worry about the same things that Kiffin does in terms of recruiting, because you do have signing day coming up tomorrow. Like, you want your new head coach to be part of that, even though he didn't recruit any of those guys. You still need him to be there, and you want his attention solely on what it's supposed to be on. And from the Ole Miss perspective, look, you're going to a rival. You're either Ole Miss or you're not. So I completely get that. Like, keeping the assistants on, I do think it's a little different just because of the kind of responsibilities they have and everything else, even though from the Ole Miss perspective, it's still like they want to save themselves as much as possible.
Yeah, but in the grand scheme of things, Charlie Weiss Jr. is the second most important guy.
Sure.
Like, I guarantee if Kiffin didn't take him, there might have been serious conversations about Weiss Jr. becoming the head coach.
Right.
And so is that, and I want to clarify because there's been a lot of stuff going on, recently. Is Golden the official head
Yes.
coach? He's not the interim head coach. He is the head coach.
He is the head coach now. It's I was about to say exactly the same as Marcus Freeman, but Freeman was obviously an interim before he became the head coach. But they fully promoted Golding to become the Ole Miss head coach. He is the guy going forward from this point and into the future. And from what I understand, just like Marcus Freeman, Golding, in terms of his involvement and importance at Ole Miss, in terms of the recruiting, very similar to the kind of importance that Marcus Freeman had, when he was defensive coordinator and obviously continues now as head coach, but very similar impact on recruiting that Golding has, parallel to the kind of impact that Marcus Freeman had.
So that's what was taking so long, is Ole Miss was just trying to get everything else sorted out.
Yeah. NH says, why aren't they going after Ole Miss, especially after what happened to FSU 2 years ago? Well, we'll find out tonight.
We don't know a definite answer. The thing is, though, is you're not losing an actual player. I think a player that is of the caliber, especially the quarterback position, is way more dramatic than losing a head coach.
Right. Exactly. But I do still think there's going to be some impact losing a guy like Lane Kiffin with his experience as a head coach and promoting what they obviously think is a very qualified and competent defensive coordinator to be head coach, but he's still just been a coordinator. And now the first game that he coaches is going to be a college football playoff game. So there's a big question as to how Golding is going to respond in that kind of situation. Very much higher pressure type situation for your first time being a head coach.
Yeah, I said it, I think, earlier in the show. It's all fun and games until you got the headset on.
Yeah, you're the man.
You're right. In the high. It's not, you're not playing freaking Old Dominion or Kennesaw State. You're playing the most important game of the year, probably against your toughest opponent all year, and now you are making the decisions in the moment.
Yep.
It's a hard spot to be in.
It's moving 3 feet to the right or the left to become that guy, the head coach. There's a big difference in the kind of decisions that you have to make in 30-second intervals when it comes to being the head coach, as opposed to just being an offensive or defensive coordinator. It's a lot different. And I think that can potentially have a big impact for Ole Miss. And again, it's going to be really interesting to see how the committee handles that when these latest rankings.
He has 0 head coaching experience prior.
Exactly. That is right. Interesting news out of both BYU and State College today. Penn State, of course, fired James Franklin because, they thought that they were going to another level. But BYU head coach Kalani Sitake, who had emerged over the last few days, according to Pete Thamel of ESPN, the BYU head coach has started informing people that he is staying at BYU. He is not going to take the Penn State job. Well, BYU was able to up the ante to keep Kalani Sitake around, apparently because the CEO of Crumble Cookies outbid Penn State's boosters to keep Sitake in Provo.
Really?
Cookies. Are you a Crumble Cookie fan, first of all?
They are way too sweet. I can have them every now and then, but they are very sweet. That is I want to say he's like a young guy too.
The Crumble Cookie guy?
Yeah, I'm trying to look up his age real quick. Oh man. Why doesn't it say this guy's age anywhere? It's I thought it was like a 20, 30-year-old something guy, but I think that's hilarious. I think that Penn State just continues to just swing and miss, and they were the first one up to the plate. They were the first one in the batter's box, and it's almost like you weren't going to get much better than a guy who was averaging 10 wins a season at Penn State. Just a guess, though. And now he's probably going to go on to Virginia Tech and put them in a better situation than what Penn State will be in over the next 4 years.
Exactly. Like, if you're Penn State, who are you even going after now? Like, all the names that were like the obvious ones, Clark Lee has signed an extension. Matt Rule has signed an extension to stay around. Obviously, Kurt Cignetti was the first one to parlay it into a big extension and a new contract.
Have you heard the rumors of Kalen DeBoer?
I've heard some of that, like where that goes.
Why would he want to go there? I don't get that.
Maybe it's because he's got those Bama people breathing down his neck and he's found out, like just what the expectations are when you follow a legend like Nick Saban. What happens if they don't get into the playoffs this year? They're in good shape to get in right now. And obviously if they win the SEC championship game, they're in, but
Brian Kelly's the answer, but
that's what they're down to right now in terms of like guys who make sense. Brian Kelly.
Freaking Michigan State got Fitzgerald.
Yeah, that's right. Michigan State got Pat Fitzgerald, but there were even some questions about Fitzgerald apparently at Michigan State because he'd been out of the game for 3 years already. And the game has changed a lot in 3 years in terms of NIL and transfer portal and everything else. Like 3 years seems like a million years ago at this point.
What about Brian Dable? What if he leaves the NFL and goes to Penn State?
Could see it. He coached for Ant VR, brought that up as well in the YouTube chat. He obviously has at least some college experience with Nick Saban down there at Alabama. That'd be an interesting one. Like if O'Brien was doing any better at Boston College, Penn State might just have him come back at this point. So
they're gonna. What I think they need to do is do their kind of homework on a Kurt Cignetti type of guy. Maybe a guy who's been around as a coordinator.
Well, all the up and comers from like the group of fives, they've already gotten the big promotions.
Summerall is gone.
Yeah, Summerall and Golish and all these other guys.
What about our guy at KU? We were talking about him on Friday.
I think that
Lance Leopold
makes some sense. Like, I don't know if Penn State would think that that's a big enough move for them, but for Leopold to even have KU in bowls and in bowl contention in the short time that he's been there after they were one of the worst programs in college football before he got there, I think you could do a heck of a lot worse. All right, we're going to have to wrap it up with that. Great stuff as always, Jess. Had fun talking with you tonight. We've got Wake Up the Echoes coming up next. Notre Dame men's basketball coming up at 9 o'clock tonight as well. We'll talk to you later. Budweiser's Weekday Sports Beat with IrishBreakdown.com.